Hello, my sewing social. Today we're going to work on a skills technique, which is machine basting and gathering. The first step is to go to your sewing machine and select the basting stitch. On mine, I have a default basting stitch. You can identify it because they're just very long straight stitches. If you don't have a default basting stitch, you can just select a straight stitch and then lengthen it so that it's longer. For reference, on my machine, a default straight stitch is 2.5 millimeters and the default basting stitch is 20 millimeters. So I've selected my basting stitch. Next, come over to your machine. If you haven't already, lower your needle, hold the thread, and lift it up and pull up your bobbin thread. And then pull out 4 to 6 inches. This will give you plenty of thread to pull from and make sure you don't lose any of those catches from your basting stitch. Next, load your fabric, place your fabric, lower your presser foot, and if you're following a pattern, make sure that you leave yourself enough room to do 2 straight lines within your seam allowance. So if your seam allowance is 1/2 inch, then make sure about 1/4 inch apart you give yourself enough room to do 2 straight lines, one right at 1/2 inch, one at 1/4 inch. So that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to stitch 1 straight line at 1/2 inch, leaving plenty of excess, and stitch the second at about 1/4 inch. Let's go. Lift my needle, pull out some excess, snip. This happens a lot when you're machine basting with a really long basting stitch. 20 millimeters, in my opinion, is pretty long. Just give it a little pull and smooth until it's straight again, and then we'll come back and do our 1/2 inch stitch. Your needle, pull out the excess, and clip. And now half the work is done for you. Here's my next tip though. And I learned this from Sewing with Nancy, bless her heart. Do you remember that show on PBS? She had like a weekly show where she'd show you some quilting technique or sewing technique. I used to love to watch that. Put in the comments what your favorite Sewing with Nancy episode is, if you've ever seen it before, and maybe we will do a recreation of a skills technique. So the trick is pull from the bobbin thread that it's a little easier to pull from. So I've sort of selected my 2 bobbin threads here and pull, 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 and just sort of gather, gather, gather. And once you're done pulling sort of half of it, here's my next tip, again, courtesy of Sewing with Nancy. Put a little pin in it. Make sure you're pulled all the way. And now what do I do to keep this from unraveling? I'm going to take this excess thread and just do a quick figure 8 around my pin. And that holds it in place. Now I'll come to the other side. Again, pulling my bobbin threads. This is like a really tight gather that I've done here, just sort of for demonstration purposes. Now keep in mind, the stitch length will sort of determine your gathers as well. You'll notice that it sort of folds in half inside that stitch. So if you want slightly tighter gathers, you could. And now stitch a line straight down in between your 2 basting stitches. Lower your presser foot, sort of line it up. Make sure to switch your stitch to a normal straight stitch. Here you can backstitch. And you notice I started about 1/2 inch down on the fabric and then backstitched up to the end, because I didn't want to pull the gather out of the end of the piece. Once in a while, I find if it sort of like disrupts a gather that I really wanted, I'll just lift my presser foot, fix the gather, and put it back. Back stitch again, cut, and lift your presser foot. And that is your nice gather. So often on skirts, you'll use sort of a bias tape to cover up your seams here. But that is a machine baste and gather. I hope you have great luck with this technique. Let me know how it goes. And also put in the comments if there's any particular technique you want to practice next time. For now, have a great day, and we'll see you next time on My Sewing Social.